As you said, like as you go on as an advisor, the more years you rack up as an advisor, your confidence level is going to increase. Are you saying like it can never like increase with the CEO, like having that level of confidence in their skill set, or are they constantly on that kind of inferiority complex?
Well, I think that's an overstatement. I think for the first several years of being in the CEO role, it's healthy to have a bit of an inferiority complex, as you shared with us, Gordon, what the experience of the CEOs that you brought together. And it's not like absolute inferiority. As you pointed out at the beginning, these are very skillful, very talented individuals that use information well, cope with risk very well, are very high functioning, performing individuals. The issue is that within 4 or 5 years, a financial advisor can feel a high degree of mastery and familiarity with virtually everything that happens. In fact, to some extent, I observe advisors almost becoming flippant with a kind of a blithe sense of of expectation that it's Groundhog Day pretty much over and over again. It is interesting to me that how financial advisors who've been doing this for 20 or 25 years, who've been through some really challenging markets, approach challenges such as we've seen recently, where maybe for the first time, if you've only been doing this for 5 or 6 years, you may have a great deal of skill in place, but for the first time you find clients who are coming in distressed, questioning your knowledge, questioning you as a provider. But again, you go through that experience once or twice, your skills come up, and now you feel like, you know what, I've been through the full market cycle 3 or 4 times, pretty much I know what to expect. I think what I'm trying to point out about the CEO is what the CEO can become confident in and feel a sense of mastery about is their ability to cope with the unexpected. Which is to say, I can feel very confident that whatever this business throws at me, I'll grapple with it as well as possible. I'm suited for this role of leader. But leadership, as I said, is the responsibility of making decisions in the context of uncertainty that have consequences for self and others, for which there are no standard procedures. Because if there was a standard procedure, someone else would have made the decision. To your point about the decisions that hit the CEO's desk are decisions that are not easy to make or maybe impossible to make because there's just a trade-off you have to decide, right? So you can get good at being in that hot seat, and you can have confidence that your processes and your approach to it have worked well to get you the best possible decisions in the past. But I use this example a lot. Jeff Bezos is a terrific business person and brought together great people that helped him navigate an enormous amount of uncertainty on the way to the ascendancy of Amazon. And the stories are legion. We don't know how many times the company came up to the brink and decisions had to be made. And, there is a certain amount of good fortune involved in that. But we have to give this guy credit. He thought about it and dealt with these decisions, et cetera, and was constantly pushing the company further, bigger, differently, adapting it. I remember when AllianceBernstein, my firm, began to discover and talk about how Amazon was moving into this cloud computing hosting because they had so much excess server capacity outside of the season of Christmas that they were now leasing that to other processes. And suddenly they discovered, oh my goodness, we have a whole new business here. And I remember how delighted and enthusiastic I was about what a wonderful moment of creativity and discovery and kismet for them, right? But Bezos stepped down as the CEO of the company last year. And took on a role now, his formal role for the firm is looking at how Amazon, or looking out into the future to figure out how Amazon's going to be disrupted and what forces will eventually put Amazon out of business. How can we cope with that? How can we predict that? And his sense was the decisions that I have to make to keep this company running and dealing with all the challenges that we face on a daily basis, operating as a very successful company, consume my attention so much that I can't think about this other thing. So I'm just going to put someone else in charge of that and think about that other thing. And it caused me to recall a conversation I had when I was doing some work up with Ray Dalio's company, Bridgewater. And that what he at one point at the time I was up there with some other folks there had confronted his senior leadership team and said to them, you guys should be thinking right now about what business we'll be in when we're no longer in the asset management business. Now,
Wow.
That's a pretty interesting leadership statement from one of the most successful hedge fund, or the most successful hedge fund company, depending on how you calculate such things, in the history of financial services. That's the kind of mindset that we're talking about here. That he's saying, what should we be doing in the future? He doesn't have an answer to it. And that's being able to tolerate that and deal with that and be humble in the face of that, but know that's your task. That's a pretty interesting place to be and a pretty challenging place to be.
So why are humans so bad at this then? Like, why is it such a challenge? Because like we talk about how, it's arguably easier to be a master of being a financial advisor as opposed to being a CEO. Like, being a financial advisor is not an easy job. The skills that you have to muster are pretty few and far between. Why? What is it about us why is it this is so hard?
Well, Gordon, we didn't evolve to cope with these kind of challenges. And so we're at the edge of our natural competencies, natural skill sets as human beings to be doing this. So let me just kind of paint a picture here, because now we're kind of treading over into that area of behavioral finance.
Mm-hmm.
If there's one thing the behavioral finance has revealed to us as financial professionals, as practitioners of this high art of helping human beings navigate their wealth and their decisions in the second half of their adulthood. If one thing has been revealed is we're not naturally suited for the kind of decisions that need to be made when it comes to money. We're not naturally good at statistics. We don't have an intuition about it. We can learn what statistics have to teach us, but there's all these wonderful little tricks and experiments that the behavioral finance guys and gals do that show how even financial professionals, physicians, et cetera, make these very fundamental mistakes around statistics. Well, that is because the way our brain works. Well, how does our brain work? Our brain works on the basis of our evolutionary precedents. So if you go back 25 to 50,000 years ago, and our central nervous system hasn't changed in 50,000 years, we have samples of humans that were frozen, just like we have all these samples of mastodons that were frozen and preserved for a long period of time. We have human beings who've been preserved that long. We're the same as we were 50,000 years ago physiologically. We're a little taller because we're better fed now and we have better clothing, but other than that, we're pretty much the same. And what that means is our brains are operating with the same wetware that we operated with when we were Paleolithic in humans coping with a challenging ecology. The thing about the ecologies that human beings evolved to master is they're very stable. And so by the time you were 12 or 13 as a Paleolithic human, you had observed your adults around you, your parents and the small family unit you lived with. They had taught you by storytelling or instruction, how to chip a flint and how to make a spear and all the skills you were going to need to survive. And you then survived by executing what you knew. Humans love that, right? If you talk with hundreds of financial advisors, as I do, and use financial advisor as a sample of humans, and you say to financial advisors, how many times have you reinvented your business over the course of your career in a significant way? Did you transition from brokerage to fee-based, advisory? Did you transition from advisory to advisory with discretion? Did you transition from mutual funds to SMAs? How many times did you make those transitions? It's very few, and it's done reluctantly, often only because they were forced to. Except for a very small number of advisors who gravitate to new ideas, they're called early adopters, and they're statistically anomalous in our industry because our industry actually selects for more conservatively behaving humans because of the cost of making, if you're not conservative in your decision making, the places where things break down and cost accrue are great. And so the industry kind of selects for careful decision makers who are slow on the trigger on that sort of thing. Well, our natural tendency is to figure out our environment, figure out the skills required for it, master it, and then execute on it. And so you have advisors who've been essentially doing the same set of skills, the same client review, the same discovery process, the same decisions about how to build portfolios. Their tools evolve and they have to adapt some things, but pretty much what they're doing is the same. And when things change around and they look forward to getting back to the way they'd always done it. That's human nature. That's human instinct. Even individuals who are highly oriented toward new things find the pace of challenges that you're facing, the uncertainties in life, difficult. It's stressful. Now, so you take this human being that's wired up to master the way it is, learn something and execute on it. You now plop them down in the third decade of the 21st century. And what you have now is a digitally enabled accelerant of the pace of change. The time from raw discovery and innovation to research that confirms the discovery, to the solidification, to engineering, to prototyping, to manufacturing, to distribution, to maturity, to disruption, and again, the next S curve and the next S curve, the time that's happening is getting smaller and smaller. And so I have with little doubt, the financial advisor who enters into the business today will see the collapsing in time of the disruptions and the new challenges they're going to have to face and overcome much more rapidly than the advisor who came in with a big rush of advisors in the 1980s and the 1990s, who are now in the process of retiring. So so for the advisor, there's going to be more need to change and evolve. I mean, one of the hallmarks of the Advisor Institute is we've worked very hard to look at the demographics and the industry trends and the regulatory and political environment and try to assess what are the likely future trends and disruptions that a retail advisor today needs to be thinking about and modeling their practice toward in order to avoid, painful disruption or even disruption that leads to obsolescence. So that's something we take very seriously. We spend a lot of time with. The fact is, for the CEO, who's managing a business that has to maintain profitability and resilience in the face of both internal threats, human management dynamics, and external threats, disruptions and shifts in the process, that human being is in a maelstrom of constant change. They can learn how to cope with it. and there's an insight I would like to share with you on that, because I know we're going to wrap out our time here in just a minute. They can learn how to cope with it, but they can never get to the place where it's familiar, because that's the nature of change. Change is coming at you and it's unfamiliar. And while we can learn how to cope with that, we're just not naturally inclined toward it for the most part. Right before the invasion of Ukraine, and as you and I are recording this today, we're about 6 months into that invasion. I was watching a Ukrainian colonel being interviewed, and I forget it was some kind of news documentary show, and he was talking about he was a commanding officer of a large number of soldiers, many of whom were newer in being recruited. Obviously, there was a ramping up that was going on, and they were showing him some of the training, the rigorous training they were going through, and it was pretty frightening what these poor people were going through to prepare to be able to function in combat. And he said something that just went all the way into me, because it was so true, and I've seen it in so many cases in the world. He said, at the moment of performance, now certainly at the moment of combat, but I apply this to the moment of performance, when you have to make a decision, bringing together all of your skills to something you've never faced before. At that moment of performance, your capabilities and your ability to function well with all of your creativity will degrade to your level of training. So what he's saying is, these soldiers that we're training today, we have to equip them with enough experiences so that when they're in actual combat and they're now facing life and death threat, when that happens and they degrade to their level of training is solid enough that they don't degrade to the point where they can't perform. This is a really key insight for leaders to think about. In the moment of performance, when you have to make a decision in the context of uncertainty that have consequences for you and others, perhaps an entire organization, those consequences may be small or they may be enormous. Your competency, your performance is going to degrade at that moment to your level of training, your level of preparation. And so for an individual who's catapulted into the CEO role, or maybe out of their own, just their raw talent and skill and success in business, and now in this role, the importance of being aware that they need to be gathering information, they need to be humble in the face of this, they need to be turning to others, looking to colleagues, taking advantage of the kind of things that Dynasty is doing to support leadership. It's critically important, because as those decisions come at you, you're going to degrade to whatever level of training and skill you've been able to develop. And again, the problem is they didn't spend 20 years being groomed for this role. The role of the financial advisor is one that you can master and execute and get into a flow state about. It's a very different role, as we're exploring, than the role of the CEO.
It's amazing. It's kind of degrading to the level of training. It's like the bedrock that you've built, and either that bedrock's there and it's not, and there isn't a culture of building that bedrock in the industry. You know, things like MBAs are really few and far between in this industry, because the whole concept of, I'm going to go away for 2 years, what happens to your client book, you know, as you're growing up through the ranks. So this has been excellent, Ken, as always. One final curveball to finish up on. And if you wanted to punt to this to one of our other recordings, it's absolutely fine. But because we're talking so much today about skills, and because we're talking so much today about humility, what about the CEO that says, I haven't got this. I haven't got it. I'm not going to get it. I'm going to bring in a professional CEO. What do you think about that tactic? Because there's got to be a few firms that are maybe playing about with that idea. Do you think that's a good idea? I mean, and if it is to be executed, what's like the important things that need to be executed as part of that plan? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I would be very skeptical that you could bring someone in who had, I mean, you would bring somebody in who had management experience and management skills and expect them to be able to make sense of the implications of the situations they're looking at. Now, that is not my way of saying that an organization wouldn't do well, and I've observed several within Dynasty do this, to bring in a chief operating officer,
sure,
whose job is to kind of wrestle the processes, get your standard operating procedures in place, kind of advise senior leadership, the CEO, on the protocols and processes of healthy decision making, and to professionalize the management of the organization. Again, a lot of financial advisors become very successful. They're very skillful in that role. Then they start to supervise other people and kind of manage an organization. Well, nothing from being a financial advisor prepares you for skillful management. Again, your performance will degrade to your level of preparation, and they're not prepared. But I would suggest to you, and by the way, this is true for me, even as a consultant to the industry, there are implications of the work of the financial advisor, understanding financial advisor behaviors, motivations, understanding the role of compensation, understanding the mechanisms and dynamics of how different parts of the institutional world of financial services, how things relate to each other, implications of regulatory dynamics, political dynamics, etc., that I think you can only have an intuitive sense of and the ability to make meaning of when you've grown up in the industry and lived in the industry for a long time. And so I think that a CEO would be flying blind if they did not have that knowledge base. Now, if they were partnered with a colleague who they could rely on to help them understand the parts of the business that are necessarily intuitive, they would probably have a greater they'd make greater contributions in terms of the orderliness of decision making and the thoroughness of decision making. They'd be less likely to be impulsive about that. But I think it would be a real tense space there. If I was bringing a CEO in, I would definitely want that CEO to be humble in the presence of the aspects of the industry that they did not know. And I'm thinking, for example, I've consulted in a lot of industries, from nonprofit industry to financial services to manufacturing. I've done, real estate. I've done a lot of stuff over the course of my career. The only way I could be helpful to organizations is if I was able to make a really clear distinction between the stuff that I know about, which are human dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, and intrapsychic dynamics, as opposed to industry dynamics that if I haven't grown up participating in that part of it, I can't presume to have the knowledge base to make sense of it with. And so part of what I'm responsible for, and Gordon, of course, you're responsible for, is we have to be humble in the face of our knowledge base. We have to know what we know. We also have to know what we don't know. But again, upon reflection, if somebody is bringing that kind of mindset to that role, then they will find those resources and those colleagues to help them with that. And ultimately, they'll submit their decision-making process when it needs to be to some input from outside and probably navigate successfully. So I think it would be a dynamic challenge.
But there can definitely like few and far between. Ken, this was excellent. We've run out of time as always. There's plenty more we could talk about. but we've run out of time. But thank you so much to everyone, to Ken, and to everyone listening out there. If you want to see more of these interviews, you can see them in our email communications and also the Dynasty knowledge base. But thank you so much for everyone's time. Thank you, Ken.
Bye, Gordon.